The 2024-25 college football season will officially be over tonight after the national championship, but I'm going to go ahead and give you my final top 25 rankings, and this does take into account all the postseason games, all the bowl games, all the playoff games, all of that. And again, we're just trying to rank these teams as if this was like a final ranking. And we, of course, can't give you a number one until we see the game tonight, so just know, and when we get there, I'll show you the winner of that game will be number one. And does that necessarily mean the loser is number two? Again, we'll talk about it in just a second. But let's get to the rankings, and we'll start at the bottom. All right, so I've got Syracuse at number 25. They finished 10-3. UNLV at 24, 11-3. Both teams won their bowl games. I still have to honor the head-to-head there with UNLV beating Syracuse in the regular season. So that's why I do have UNLV ahead of them. Army finishes strong with a bowl win. How about Missouri beating Iowa? They finished 10-3. I know their 3 losses were not very close, but they still managed to win 10 games. So a good season for Missouri. South Carolina, number 21. Bowl game did knock them down quite a bit. And so we talk about head-to-head, obviously, with these rankings. I like to use it when I can, but there are certain situations where it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. An example would be with Clemson in South Carolina. So again, we'll get to them in just a second. But yeah, all these teams here, Syracuse, a bit of a surprise team. UNLV kind of came out of nowhere. Army definitely came out of nowhere. Missouri was exactly what we thought they would be. We talked about that on the recap video. I mean, this was one of the easiest teams to predict this season. It looked like a very obvious 9-3. That's what we got. South Carolina was a surprise team as well. Very disappointing the way they played in that bowl game against Illinois. And again, that does drop them a little bit in the rankings. So let's move on now to 16 through 20. So we've got Alabama at number 20 after the loss to Florida, or loss to Michigan, I should say. And I think there are going to be those out there that will probably comment on this video and say there's no way Michigan or Florida should be ranked with 5 losses. But look, I have to look at how these teams finished. Yes, the entire season, everything matters. But they finished like really good teams. And I know 5 losses, it's kind of hard to put a 5-loss team in here, but Michigan beat Alabama, and we're talking about 5 losses versus 4 losses. They beat them head-to-head. In that situation, it's hard for me to put Alabama ahead of Michigan. And then again, Florida will finish as one of the hottest teams in the country, beating LSU, beating Ole Miss, blowing out Florida State. He's blowout win in their bowl game. I just felt like Michigan and Florida deserved to be ranked, so I did put them in here at 18 and 19, and again, Alabama at 20. Miami at 17, tough loss to Iowa State in their bowl game. Boy, if they just could have found a defense this year, Miami could have been a player, a potential contender in the college football playoff, but that defense really let them down, and they do finish with 10 wins, though, so still a successful season. Illinois at 16, very nice win over South Carolina in the bowl game. It was a close game, so I could see Illinois being ranked a little bit lower. But again, when I just look at the teams, Illinois, Miami, both 10-3, similar resumes. Illinois won their bowl game, Miami lost their bowl game. Things like that are what we look at when we do these rankings. So I do have Illinois at number 16. And let's move on now to 11 through 15. So I've got Iowa State at number 15 as they finish 11-3. SMU at number 14, they finish 11-3. Clemson at 10-4 at number 13. Boise State 12 at 12-2, and then BYU at number 11 at 11-2. So, I think you could make an argument for Clemson and SMU both being ranked much lower, maybe even behind South Carolina. I think you could make that argument. But again, I look at Clemson and the way they played Texas pretty close. I felt like there was enough there for me to put Clemson up into this category. Again, if you want to make that argument, you want to say, well, Clemson and SMU, they should probably be behind South Carolina because South Carolina beat Clemson. Again, I have to keep Clemson above SMU. I don't see putting SMU above Clemson, but there is an argument for that, and it's definitely one way of looking at it, and I kind of went back and forth. But again, I felt like Clemson's showing against Texas was enough to put them at 13. Again, that's one I struggled with. Iowa State, nice win over Miami in their bowl game, finishes number 15. Boise State, showed some fight against Penn State, but never really had a chance to win that game. But still a great season for the Broncos. But I feel like BYU should be ahead of them. BYU, probably the most underrated team in college football this year. They beat SMU. they had a very strong resume. They lost close games. I mean, they didn't get to play the Big 12 championship, but I feel like BYU was the second best team in the Big 12. I felt like they were better than Iowa State. Obviously, they proved that they were much better than Colorado. So that impressive bowl win is enough for me to put BYU all the way up at number 11. And who knows, maybe even that is a little bit too low. This was a very good BYU team. And again, they were, to me, probably the biggest surprise, I would say, because I did not expect BYU to be very good this year. So yeah, they surprised me. I think they surprised a lot of people. Obviously, they did. Their over-under was under 6 wins. So yeah, very, very big season, great season for BYU. And they could be a team with a lot of momentum heading into next year. And remember, we'll do our way too early top 25. We've always done this the day after the national championship. So we'll see where BYU winds up in those rankings. Probably going to be a top 15 team, I would say. All right, let's move on now to 6 through 10. I've got Ole Miss at number 10. Strong win in their bowl game. Again, I go back to all 3 of their losses by 1 score. All 3 of their losses were games where, it literally came down to the last play. You look at their wins were all by 2 scores or more. So, this is a very good Ole Miss team. Just lost some close games, but I do have them finishing in the top 10. I've got Tennessee at number 9. Man, maybe they're underrated. The way they looked against Ohio State, it was not good. And their only win was, Alabama. That win doesn't look as good. So maybe I'm overrating Tennessee, but I do have to give them some credit for the 10 wins and the schedule they played. Arizona State at number 8. They played Texas really close. They were very impressive in the Big 12 championship, so I believe they should be ranked definitely in the top 10. Indiana at number 7. Some people will say that this is way too high. They only lost 2 games. They lost to the 2 teams that are playing in the national championship. And if you look at their wins, I know they don't have a lot of great wins, but outside of the Michigan game, and again, Michigan finished the season really strong. Those other wins were like blowouts. They earned this ranking because they didn't mess around against bad teams. And almost all these other teams had close calls against bad teams, or they even lost to bad teams. So for me, that is why Indiana deserves to be number 7. They took care of business against those lesser opponents, and they only lost to the 2 best teams in the country. So 7 is, I think, a fair ranking for Indiana. I've got Texas at 6. So look, I know they went further than Georgia in the playoff. Georgia beat them twice, and Georgia did not have Carson Beck in their playoff game. So that's why I'm sticking with Georgia ahead of Texas. I think I would have a problem putting Texas ahead of Georgia in these final rankings. So I do have Georgia at 5. If they had Carson Beck, if they were in that playoff game, maybe I don't put them this high, but I got to give them a little bit of a break for that. And again, Notre Dame's playing in the national championship. So Georgia at 5, Penn State at 4. They finished the season strong. I've got Oregon at 3, and this is the one thing. So I've got Ohio State, Notre Dame 1 or 2, depending on who wins tonight. If Ohio State were to beat Notre Dame by 21 or more points, like 20 plus points, I think you could then make an argument for Oregon at number 2. I really do, because they only lost 1 game and they had to play Ohio State. So if they're, that game wasn't really competitive though. So it's hard for me to put Oregon at 2, given the fact that Notre Dame just went through these, they beat Indiana, they beat Georgia, they beat Penn State. They've just got so many more wins than Oregon. Again, if it is a complete blowout, if it's Georgia TCU, then I'm putting Oregon at 2, and just keep that in mind. But I don't see that happening. I think it's at least somewhat competitive. And so I think Notre Dame finishes 2, Ohio State 1. If Notre Dame wins the game, obviously Notre Dame goes to number 1. I think Ohio State has been impressive enough to still, even with 3 losses, be the number 2 team. They beat Oregon, beat Penn State, but you can make the argument that Oregon beat Ohio State the first time, and then maybe you put Notre Dame at 1, Oregon at 2, Ohio State at 3. This really doesn't matter; it's just for fun. But I think that it's pretty clear that we're going to go with the winner at 1, the loser at 2, and then Oregon at 3. Oregon really didn't have a great resume this year. They beat Ohio State and Penn State, and those were good wins. And they had a pretty good resume, but I think it's more about the way they lost to Ohio State. If that game was close, if it was a 10-point game, then I think you have a great argument for Oregon to be number 2 if Ohio State does in fact win tonight, or even if Notre Dame wins. I think you'd have an argument for Oregon at number 2. But these are my final rankings for 2024. Again, tomorrow, watch out for our way too early top 25 rankings for 2025. It's hard to do this after the postseason. You know, teams play so many more or less games with the playoff and all that. So I don't feel great about this top 25, and I'd love to know what you guys think about it. And of course, give me your top 25. How would you rank the teams to close out the season? Let me know down in the comments below.